Hey folks, it's Gary. Welcome to the review of Deadhouse Gates, the second book in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series by Steven Erikson. Just so you know, I will keep this review spoiler-free, except for one tiny thing about one specific character in the book. It's not a huge spoiler, but there will be a tiny little bit of a spoiler for a character you may wish to be surprised by. I will put a warning before that spoiler at the bottom of the screen. So this is a pretty big book. It runs to 800 plus pages in mass market paperback, which is the physical version that I have, but mostly I read it via the ebook. I did occasionally dabble into the entire immersion reading trick where you simultaneously read and listen to the audiobook. I kind of got distracted. I'll do a future video on that. Also worth mentioning is that this is my second time reading Deadhouse Gates, and I liked it just as much this time as I did last time. Some years ago, probably 20 or so years ago, I read the first 4 books in the Malazan Book of the Fallen series, and of the 4, this is the one that I liked the best at the time. And so far, on the reread between books 1 and 2, I do like it better than Gardens of the Moon, book 1, but the difference is a lot less than it was the first time around, but that's because I liked Gardens of the Moon a lot more the second time, not because Deadhouse Gates is any weaker. I would be remiss as a booktuber without giving you some content warnings, not about this review, but about the book itself. This is going to be a pretty difficult read for those who don't want to deal with the kinds of things that we typically see content warnings about. And pretty much every conceivable content warning, from sexual assault to body horror, does show up in this book at some point. So the book starts a couple of months, I think, after the events of Gardens of the Moon. And we do see a small number of characters cross over from the previous book. But by and large, we are dealing with mostly new characters in an entirely new situation, not to the Malazan Empire, but to us as readers, because we saw very little of this in Gardens of the Moon, although the upcoming rebellion in 7 cities is one of the things that got mentioned in the first book. And that right there is pretty much the plot of Deadhouse Gates, at least at the beginning. The continent or subcontinent of 7 cities, currently ruled by the Malazan Empire, is about to erupt in a prophesied rebellion called the Whirlwind. And a lot of the book deals with that, but it goes in a number of other directions as well, which I won't spoil. I'm really not going to tell you anything else about the plot of Deadhouse Gates. I will, however, say that Erikson does a spectacularly good job of building momentum to an effective and satisfying conclusion. And it's in this book that a lot of the groundwork for the greater series as a whole starts to be laid down. Do not mistake that for a statement that you'll understand absolutely everything after reading this book. You will not. The setting and world building here remain top tier, just as they were in Gardens of the Moon, but you have a tighter focus on the subcontinent of 7 cities and what's going on there specifically. This feels a little bit less scattered than Gardens of the Moon can feel, and how Gardens of the Moon felt for me the first time I read it. So the book has 24 chapters, just like Gardens of the Moon, more or less. All the books that I've even looked at the table of contents so far actually have something like 24, 25, 23, 26 chapters or so, and those chapters are divided into parts, which are pretty discrete. There is a significant style and tone shift here from Gardens of the Moon. Gardens of the Moon was not really whimsical. It was dark and heavy in places. This book is relentlessly dark and relentlessly heavy. And like I said, some folks will probably bounce off the entire series based on the contents of this book alone. Erikson's basic structure for Deadhouse Gates does pretty much mirror Gardens of the Moon. However, there are a lot of point of view changes. I count 120, and there are a lot of point of view characters. I counted 24. And you switch between points of view inside each individual chapter. More or less, you can change point of view as frequently as every scene, but there aren't as many abrupt point of view changes like that as there were in Gardens of the Moon. You'll more often in Deadhouse Gates, and so far in Memories of Ice, the third book, you will stick with the same character for a couple of subsequent scenes before moving on to a new point of view character. Some of the time. Sometimes it'll just shift away. The themes Erikson is working with here are the themes that I think he's developing for the entire series. The basic inhumanity of humanity, the brutality and inhumanity of war and of humans to other humans. This is a thing that will be developed. The gods of this world are, generally speaking, not nice people, and a lot of the humans in this book are not nice people either. The characters remain pretty strong in Deadhouse Gates. In a few cases, they are characters that carried over from Gardens of the Moon, but mostly they are new characters. The character with the most point of view material in this book is Deuter, the imperial historian of the Malazan Empire, but we also spend a lot of time with Fiddler of the Bridge Burners, with Mappo and Icarium, a pair of wanderers that have a really interesting arc, with the assassin Kalam, who also has a pretty interesting arc, and with the Malazan mage Culp, who is a pretty interesting character in that he's a mage, he's powerful, but he's not absurdly powerful as some of the other mages that we've seen already in the series are, and some of which were point of view characters. We also spend a lot of time with Felison, who is the sister, the youngest sister of Ganos Paran, who we met in Gardens of the Moon. It is in Felison's point of view segments that I think are the hardest to read because a lot of bad stuff happens to her. We also have Kalam, the ex-Claw Imperial Assassin, as a point of view character in this book, and his story is also very satisfying, and he is just a regular guy, but a total badass nonetheless, capable of holding his own among a lot of other badass characters. Talking about the characters, however, is where I give you my one extremely minor spoiler warning. So here it is. My favorite character in the book is Fiddler's horse. That is not a clapback, by the way. Fiddler's horse is fucking awesome. Now, when I originally read this book something like 20 years ago, I then went on many years later to rate it on Goodreads as 5 stars, having read it long ago. I said at the time that I would revisit that opinion after the reread, and I did, but the book is still a 5-star book. This is an incredible book, even though it's really tough to get through, not because of the structure, the writing style, or anything like that, but because of the contents. It is dark. It is really dark. And I don't remember that the subsequent 2 books, which is as far as I read in this series, were quite this dark. This book is really friggin' dark. Nevertheless, if you can deal with that, this book is highly recommended. Now, the series itself has a reputation for high complexity and difficulty, and I think those things are true, but they're usually overstated. Really, the only thing that's really necessary is that you need to read closely and pay close attention. Don't read this in bed if you're trying to go to sleep. Another piece of good advice that I got from BookTube is that I think it's a good idea to treat each scene, each chapter, and indeed each book, at least for the first several books, as kind of their own things, their own separate books with links between them. The greater story will begin to emerge as you continue to read. And one of the joys of this series is that you are discovering things along with the characters in many cases, while in other cases you know a lot of stuff that the characters themselves do not know. In case you're finding this book difficult, I will give you a couple of resources. One of which is the Malazan subreddit, which stay out of the actual forum part, but they have a community resources section. I strongly recommend avoiding spoilers for this entire series, by the way, so be very careful about even Googling character names. You might get spoiled big time. I did, although not for this book. But the Malazan subreddit has a great section on community resources. Things with spoilers are flagged. There are some guides for the first 6 books in the series that kind of go through everything chapter by chapter, avoiding spoilers. There's also a great podcast called 10 Very Big Books that you can find wherever you listen to podcasts. And they go through the books a couple of chapters in each episode, and it's a really good podcast. Enjoyed it tremendously. Have already moved on to Memories of Ice, which is book 3. I think this series has the potential to be one of the all-time great fantasy series and might fall very high on a hypothetical future list that I might assemble.